with, you know, Michael Segru.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is a question, but what would someone like Socrates or Plato or people who understand certain things say is meaningful at the end of someone's life?
Well, I don't know if you should Google Michael Segru or go to YouTube and write his name. I think he has a podcast that he does with his daughter. He's no longer the handsome chap that he used to be. He has changed quite a lot, and it may be because the cancer has come back and he's on medication. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the story is with him, but he's just very, very different. He's not retired, I think. And there is some delay in his expressions now. His mind is quite sharp, but you know. You ask what meaning is there for someone who is near the end of his or her life?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have all sorts of ways of looking at this. First, you can be healthy and be near death. In other words, you can be like Michael Segru. The cancer has come back, it's stage 4. But you can manage the pain and the discomfort by various medicines. And so what happens, you wake up, you place your body in a chair, your daughter asks a question, and then you just talk about Plato, you talk about the guardians. And that's how you spend your last days. You are healthy enough to have no real use for your body. You have no real use for the stuff around your house. You have no real use for people. But you have some use for going back in time and remembering what Plato said about society, and you just talk about that for 2 hours. That's a good life. That's a very meaningful way of you spending your last days. Then you have someone who's nearing death, but they are very, very, very sick, and no amount of medication is going to allow them freedom from the pain that is imposed on them by their body. That you can't find much meaning except that you hope that this particular medicine works or that particular medicine works. And as far as I know, and this has happened to 2 of our friends who had cancer, and what usually happens, and you know this much better than I because you're in the caregiving business, that ultimately what they do is they find nothing meaningful. They don't find life meaningful at all. They don't find their own existence meaningful because the pain is too much. And all they're doing is sleeping, and they can't even sleep well. So what they do is they stop eating, and virtually they just starve themselves to death. So when you talk about what happens if there is something meaningful for anyone who is nearing death, it depends how you are dying. What is your condition? What is your physical condition? Because if, see, what usually happens, I think, and again, I don't know this stuff too well. It's something I've mentioned to Cassie a couple of times. And I mention it to Cassie because my mom has mentioned it to me. But my head is filled with bricks and concrete, so I couldn't really process her message too well. And I relayed my mom's message to Cassie in my own language, hoping that, her brain is a bit more fertile than mine, which is, let's say I call you and I say, Stacy, and you're living in Davis. I'm sorry to trouble you. Do you mind coming to Oakland? And you say, when? You say, well, how about tomorrow? Say, okay. Now you say okay because your belly doesn't ache, you don't have a headache, your body is healthy, so your body is not in the way. When I call you and I say come over, I create a desire. Sure, it's for example a piece of advertisement. The advertisement creates desire, and depending on our relationship, you either say, well, maybe I can come in 2 weeks, I'm busy tomorrow, or you say, no, I can kind of put those things aside and I can come over, for example. And then tomorrow comes and you wake up and you realize you've been throwing up all night. And you wake up, every muscle in your body aches, every bone aches, and you call me and you say, I don't think I can make it. So what's happening is, what you want is to come to Oakland. What your body says is, no, I'm not going to let you. Okay? Now, you stay home, you recover for a couple of days, and you call me and say, I'm feeling better now, I can come. I say, okay. Now imagine if you stayed in bed 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 weeks. The only way you can ever bring your desires to life is by having a body that's relatively functional, because you need your body to take your desire from point A to point B. You need to get your body to target so you can get that particular item. You need to get your body to the car, and you need to be sober enough, healthy enough to be able to drive for 2.5 hours. If your body is becoming an obstacle, well, that's not going to happen. And there comes a point when someone is really, really sick and their body is not helping them in going to a place where they want to go. I mean, Hussein was a writer. Hussein was a thinker. Hussein was someone who enjoyed people's company. Hussein was someone who had a wife and a daughter. Okay? And there comes, and it's, these are things I think that, again, you need to unpack like everything else we've talked about tonight, which is there comes a point where you say, I want to write, but I can't. I just can't. My mind is not clear enough, and it's because of the medication. So there comes a point where you say, you just resign. I'm not writing anymore. I just can't do it. You fight, you struggle, but eventually you kind of walk away from writing peacefully. You have come to realize your limitations. You've come to realize your capacity. You've come to realize this is something you can no longer do, and you just retire from it. Okay? But the next is, well, there is my wife. I look at my wife, she's about 45. She can take care of herself, that's fine. But now I have a 17-year-old, 16-year-old daughter, or a son, or a this or a that. What is she going to do? She's busy teaching this, she's busy teaching that, she's busy doing this, and she's busy doing that. What is she going to do? And all of a sudden you realize, yes, you have cancer, yes, you're dying. It's not curable, but you're worried about your daughter. So you summon up the will to, somehow pray, to the gods so they can heal your body, so you can once again begin to walk and, be there for your daughter, not so much for your wife, even though you love her. And then there comes a point where you say, and again, these are just gradual, very, very, very like tiny little baby steps you have to go, where you say, I can't do anything for my daughter, I'm just too sick. I just hope she finds her way. I hope no harm comes to her. And you begin to have these sorts of prayers, do you see? I hope my wife will, it's like when one of the last times we went there, Hossein looked at my sister and said to her, just in case you call my wife and ask her to come over and she says no, don't give up. Keep calling her. Keep inviting her. Keep calling my daughter and my son. If even they say no, don't be bothered by their rejection. You're the only family that I can trust. And my sister says, "Oh, Hussein, don't worry. We'll never, give up or be offended by their rejection. We'll keep calling. We'll keep asking. And we'll keep asking them to come over and we can sit and have a good time and this and that." Okay? And so there comes a point where you kind of just say, okay, I can't do this on my own. I need to ask someone. Then there comes a point where you say, I love my wife. I love my daughter. It's best that I just go because I'm a burden. And then there comes a point where you don't even think that way. You just say, well, I'm not even a burden. I don't even care if I'm a burden. There is nothing for me to do down here anymore. I'm just a bundle of pain, a pain that's never going to go away, regardless of how much medication I take. And then after some struggle, you just kind of accept and you go. So again, when you talk about meaning and death, it depends how healthy and how sick you are, because those are the determining factors as to how much you can do. And it matters very little how strong your will is. And I think Aldous Huxley was ultimately right. Eventually you're a slave to vomit and sickness. I think if anyone who is near death, or anyone who contemplates and reflects on death constantly, I think if they don't get depressed by the reflection, by their focus on death, whatever activity they do, they can be somewhat meaningful, even though death is like a black hole that just takes everything and gives you nothing back. But someone like Michael Segru, who's just sitting and really looking quite bad, but speaks really well and inspires, as you just listen, there's a good amount of meaning in that. There comes a time where there's just too much pain in his body and he can't talk. That's the only thing, if that's the only thing that gives you life meaning, is for your daughter to turn on the camera and turn on the microphone and for you to talk. And he is a genius, he really, really is. When your last perhaps option to meaning is taken away from you, there is nothing left. There is this great scene in the movie directed by Clint Eastwood, $1 Million Baby. She's a nobody, she loves boxing, and she goes to Clint Eastwood's gym and she practices, and she keeps asking him, train me. He says no. Eventually he says yes, and to everybody's surprise, she's great. She's just born to be a boxer. She's in a ring with someone who doesn't play by the rules. The bell is rang. This girl hits her when her back is to her, and she falls and hits her neck on the chair, and she becomes paralyzed. She can still do a few things. She's paralyzed neck down, but she can think and she can talk a little bit. There comes a point where her sickness just gets to a point where there isn't much she can do. She's hardly awake. She can't really eat anything. And she keeps looking at her coach. Clint Eastwood says, "Can you please turn off the life machine?" And, he tells her, there are like programs for people who are paralyzed from neck down. You're so quite healthy. You can do A, you can do B, you can do C. And it's really his act of desperation because I suppose he feels responsible. Second, he invested a good amount of time, and they have a great relationship. And perhaps it's only relationship that he's had, and he doesn't want to let it go. But there comes a point where she begs him, to turn off the life machine so she could just die in peace. And he looks at her. He looks at her condition. He also understands her past, the past that she was a champion. She was really, really good. But it's something that she can no longer do. And her body is in a state where it can't do very much with paralysis neck down. You're in a really, really bad shape. And you just need to be fed. You need to be on a life support all the time. And eventually, he overcomes all the struggles. And he turns off the life machine. He walks out of the hospital and the movie ends. I think what eventually happens is there are some very, very lucky people who sleep and don't wake up. And it's something that I think as you age, as you get older, it's something you pray for. Because you see, your friends, you met them when you were like 15 or 16, now all of you are 70. And every time the phone rings, your friend says, "Oh, our buddy Joe, he's really, really sick." And then the next day, another call comes, "Oh, our friend Jack, he broke his hip and he can't even walk, he's bedridden." And then every day you hear all this news that all your friends, who were once young are now old, who can't walk, who can't breathe, who can't bathe, who can't eat. And the stuff you never thought about, all of a sudden you begin to think about, man, I am old. I hope I don't get cancer. I hope I don't fall in the bathtub and break my hip or my back or my this or my that. And then if you were praying to Jesus Christ to save your soul, now you have a different kind of prayer. You say, "Jesus, I'm going to sleep tonight. I'm beginning to feel I'm slipping a little. Can you just make sure I don't wake up in the morning? I just want to die in peace." And it's a very interesting phenomenon that happens to us as human beings as you get older, And the thing with death, the thing with old age, is that little by little things are taken away from you. All the things that used to give you meaning. We went to the kids. They had a ceremony we went to, and there was this woman who said, "Yeah, my father, he's about like 80 or 70, and he runs every day. He used to run every day for like 20 miles. And then he slipped and broke his hip or something happened. And the doctors told him, don't run, just give your body some rest." But he doesn't know what to do, so he starts running. And now his injury is to the extent that he can't even walk. He can't even sit up. And now every time I go there, he says, "I want to die." So this is what happens as you get older. Your abilities are taken away from you. And then, if you are lucky, if you're very, very lucky like Michael Sugrue, because the thing about Socrates, the thing about Michael Sugrue, the thing about Jordan Peterson is you don't need your hands, you don't need your legs. You don't even need to, have the ability to bathe. All you really need is a mind that's sharp and you can express yourself through words, speech. They can cut my body from neck down. As long as I have a head and a mouth and a tongue, and as long as I'm sharp enough to think, I don't need my body. These are really, really, really very lucky people, because they are people of the mind, or they are people of the spirit. They don't need to be a carpenter. They don't need to work with their hands or their bodies to make their life meaningful. They can simply sit on a chair like Michael Sugrue and talk and talk and talk. See, old age and sickness, it has taken away from them physical abilities. But their life was never really about physical ability. The only physical ability they really needed was to walk from their home to the campus, from the campus to the office, from the office to the classroom. That's all they really needed the body for. The rest is sitting and then expressing ideas to the students. That's all they wanted to do, and they had. So what old age eventually does is, well, you can't even go from your house to the campus. Okay? You can't even walk. All you can do is just sit on the sofa. And then you say, okay, well, listen, I've never really had much use for my body. It's been a great friend, but I just talked. I was a talking kid in the classroom. And the daughter says, well, if that's the case, you know what? Just sit on that recliner. You look really good. I'll come over, I'll wash your hair, comb your beard, I'll make you a cup of coffee, and then I'll turn on the camera and the microphone. Just talk. That's great. Now, it would be profoundly devastating if, who was it? Gregory Peck, I think it was. Not Gregory, we saw it. Humphrey Bogart. And I think he had cancer of the jaw or cancer of the throat, where they told him that he can't talk, or he lose the ability to talk. And they said, let us remove this tumor from your throat. No, the story was that he was told that he's going to die because of the cancer, but it was in his throat. And they said to him, but there's a way we can save your life. We'll just remove your vocal cords on which this tumor is growing, but then you can't act and you can't talk. And he weighed the options and he said, the only thing meaningful in my life is acting and talking, being on the stage. If I can't do that, my life has no meaning. And he chose to live with cancer and ultimately die. So, and I think to some extent it's a really insightful thing to kind of reflect on, that since eventually old age is going to take away your physical body, take away your physical abilities. You won't be able to walk around the house the way you used to. In fact, most often you just want to sit. If you don't want to slowly turn into a vegetable, start enjoying listening to audiobooks. Better yet, enjoy having gatherings. Start having gatherings where all of you will sit and just talk about this stuff. Because all you're doing is sitting on the floor and just talking. And for the past many hours, us sitting here, you had no need for your legs. You had no need, if anything, your legs and your back, they've been obstacles. They keep hurting and you have to move around. When you get sick and old, you won't even feel them. which is great. You can sit for hours, months, and just talk, you know. And that's, I think, one of the nice things about perhaps being reflective or enjoying thinking, because there comes a point where you can just sit and talk without needing to go anywhere. But once that goes away, then your life becomes completely meaningless. And the idea of just breathing in and out and being fed through the tube, it won't be as exciting. You know, Emmanuel, Sarah's father, who had cancer, I never spoke to him about death, not once. Because he had a mind that had the power to create meaning for him. You know, I knew he was going to die, but that was something for me to know, not something for me to express to him. That wasn't my job. My job was to once in a while go to the room that you'll occupy tonight and say, "So Emmanuel, how are you doing?" And then I would just wait to see what he's saying. You know, he never spoke about death. He spoke about the New Testament. He spoke about faith. And I, even though perhaps, you know, unintentionally or in a very side way, sort of a way, he was talking about the ending of his life, you know. We never talked about it openly. And I think that was a great thing, you know, because he could find meaning in the struggle, in the hope, and even the self-deception that he has the power to defeat cancer. You know, unless someone just comes and says, "Yeah, you know, like Hussein, I'm done. I just don't want to do it anymore." Yeah. I'm not quite sure at what stage, you know, Socrates made the statement that the only task of philosophy is to help you die well. I don't know. I doubt very much he said that in his 20s or 30s or 40s, and if he did, I don't really think he knew what he was talking about. You know, it's one thing to say something profound, but it's quite different to say something profound with experience. You know, I don't like our neighbor. I don't like him at all. And I remember Yusuf and I were walking in the street, and he stepped just a couple of feet into his driveway. And I said, "Yusuf, get out." He says, "Why?" "You need to be out of his space." And he looks at me and says, "Dad, didn't God create him?" I said, "Yeah. And shouldn't we love everything God creates?" I wanted to smack Yusuf because he had checkmated me. You know, But Yusuf had said something very, very, very profound. I don't even think that Jesus could say such a thing. But despite all the profundity, you have a 3-year-old, And to some extent, I think it made me think of many stories, of course, in Fariduddin Attar's Taskaratul Awliya, which is, stories of the Sufi sages, where, kids ask these strange questions of their fathers, and the fathers say, oh my God, this question was put to him by God, or, put into his chest by God. But there is this great story by Gurdjieff where, this mother goes and says, I really like you and I like your philosophy and teachings. I want to bring my son so you can teach him. And Gurdjieff asks her, how old is your son? He says, my son is 4 years old. And Gurdjieff says, no, no, no. From 0 to 7, God lives in all children. They don't need to be taught. They're divine. Bring him to me when he's 7, because that's the time when he'll become contaminated. Even though Yusuf was right about the thing that the statement that he had made, the difficulty with that is that he has no real understanding of what it means to be harassed, and he has no real understanding of what it means to be what harassment turns you into flesh. Harassment creates anger, which makes you more of a flesh. It makes you stupid. It makes you grounded. It forces upon you the idea of revenge, hurt, betrayal, all those things. He doesn't understand that you must love your neighbor. It's very, very true. But the stuff you have to overcome, you need to have some superpowers, because if, as an ordinary human being, it's impossible to love someone who has harassed and abused you for 10 years, do you see? And sometimes it's an amazing thing, I sit in my office, I'm tired, and perhaps bored or just indifferent, and I kind of do YouTube, and there's a mother in the court, and there's the guy who, shot her son in cold blood. And the mother just stands up, looks at the judge and says, Judge, I forgive him. And I want to have supper with him. And I want to hug him and tell him I understand, that I see him as my own son. You can sentence him. You can execute him, but I want to have an hour with him. And I say, my God, this is amazing, this is what, and it doesn't really matter if Jesus is true or not, it doesn't matter if the Gospels are true or not, but to believe, to have faith, and to have that faith have grand teachings of compassion and forgiveness. It's really, really, really profound. And I don't know at what stage a mother or a father or anyone can bring themselves to a stage where they have overcome anger, all the demons that just make you an awful human being. Where they take this loss, this grief, and they help you season it with insight and wisdom about the human condition. That, it ultimately goes back to Socrates, that no one really does anything bad because they enjoy pain. People do what they do because they think it's good, it gives them pleasure. And it's only in time that they realize what they've done was wrong, But initially everybody does what they do because they think it's right, because they think it's good. So, anyways, I'm not really quite sure how we got to this. Here we are.